I'm Olivia and I'm a senior Girl Scout. For my Silver Award, I did a project on pocket pets. We helped a small animal shelter for pocket pets such as guinea pigs, hamsters, and mice by making hammocks and cuddle sacks for the animals, which is what I'm going to be teaching you how to make today. If you're a Girl Scout, then these sewing skills can help you for your bronze, silver, or gold award in the future. And by knowing these skills, you can make all sorts of things to help people and animals all around the world. And if you're not a Girl Scout, then these sewing skills can be helpful for just about anything. All right, now let's get started. First, we start out by cutting out our pieces of fabric. Here I have one piece of cotton and one piece of anti-pill fleece. But always make sure to iron your cotton first so you don't have any wrinkles, because that could make your cutting all wonky and possibly ruin your finished product. But don't iron the fleece. Okay, for this I used 10 by 10, 10 inches by 10 inches, but you can really use any dimensions you want for all sorts of animals, like making a liner for a cage. But if you're making a hammock for a pocket pet, I would recommend 10 inches by 10 inches, 14 inches by 14 inches, and 17 inches by 17 inches. And here's some examples. This is the 10 inches by 10 inches, the finished product, 14 inches by 14 inches, and 17 inches by 17 inches. But before we start sewing, we need to have the right sides of the fabric together. So either the side with the brighter print, which is this side, or the side that's fluffier, which would be this side. And so we put those together because we'll be flipping this inside out later on. Okay, now let's do our seam allowance before we get started. If you need one, I'm gonna give myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here we go. So I'm gonna take a ruler and I'm going to mark it because this is the line where we're gonna be sewing. Ignore that. There we go. And I mark the line on which we'll be sewing. And this is just excess fabric in case we mess up. So if you mess up and you go off this way, you can always fix it because it'll look perfectly fine once you cut it off and flip it inside out. There we go. And here I'm using a fabric safe marker, which is very important because you don't want a marker that will stain your fabric. Okay, here we go. And one thing I forgot to do first is always pin or clip your fabric in place before you get started so your fabric isn't moving around. So we wouldn't want that to happen. Otherwise it can get all wonky. And you should always do this before sewing as well. Alright, after we do that, we're gonna cut out the loops for the hammock. Here I cut mine about 5 inches long and a 1/2 inch thick, and they don't have to be perfect. We need 4 of those. And we're gonna need to pin them inside out, but first we're going to fold them in half, like this. And one thing I find easiest is to pin them in half, or clip them, depending on what you have at home. Here we go. And we're gonna line them up like this, like line up where it folds. And we're gonna mark how big we want our loops to be. So generally I place them like this and just see what's a good length. So I would say about here is good, and it doesn't have to be exact because it'll look just fine the way it is. And we're gonna mark it there. And now we're gonna pin them inside out. So we're gonna take this mark that I just put and put it at the very corner of our seam allowance, like this, in between the fabrics. So that when we flip it inside out, it'll look just like this. And do that with all the sides. And you want to make sure you're pinning them at least a little bit straight, so when you lay them out, they're flat and not crooked. Okay, now we get to start sewing. Okay, so first we're going to start where we're going to mark where we start and stop sewing, because we want to have a hole so we can flip it inside out to make it look nice. And we want to mark it so we don't make the hole too small by accident, because otherwise it will be hard to flip. So here is where I'm going to start sewing, and I'm going to stop sewing around here, and we can start sewing now. All right, so I'm going to put my needle down right on the seam allowance, because that's where I want to follow. And I'm going to put the presser foot down like that. And first I'm going to do 2 stitches forward and about 1 stitch backwards. So there we go. And now we can start sewing along the seam allowance. And when we get to a clip, we want to pause, take the clip out, move it out of the way so it doesn't interfere with the sewing machine, and we can continue going. Now, when we get to a corner, we want to stop exactly on the corner, and we want to make sure the needle is down into the fabric. So if it's not down, turn this knob on the side and put it down into the fabric so it doesn't mess up the stitches. Now we're gonna lift the presser foot up and carefully turn the fabric in the direction of our seam allowance. And when we get to one of these loops, you just sew over it. It's like you can't even notice it. And then we continue sewing once again. And when you get to the clip, you take the clip, you stop the machine, and then we start going again. Okay, now we're at a corner again. You take the clip out, you stop, and we go a little bit more. You lift the presser foot up, turn the fabric, put the presser foot back down again, and continue sewing. And make sure you're watching for where we start and stop sewing. So right about here. So I'm gonna sew this and then that, just to make sure I know where I'm going so I don't accidentally sew over the stop position. Turn the fabric down, continue sewing. And always make sure you're using your hands to guide the fabric so it stays on the seam allowance the whole time. Otherwise, it won't be a perfect square and it'll be a little wonky. Okay. We're at our stop position, so I'm going to put the presser foot down, sew a little bit more, and then I'm going to do 2 stitches forward and about 1 stitch backwards, or 2 stitches backwards, it really doesn't matter, and then do about 2 to 3 stitches forward. And then we're going to lift up the presser foot, lift up the needle if it's down, and then we're going to pull the fabric out and cut the thread. And there we go. We've sewed all the edges. And now we're going to take the fabric and pull it inside out to look at our hammock. And it is so cute. And don't worry about this hole right here or whether this part of the loop is wonky and it's not angled, because we're gonna fix that by tucking it in. So we're going to take this fabric and tuck it in like this so the raw edge is inside so we won't see that. And another thing you might want to do if you have a larger seam allowance than me, like if you have a 1-inch seam allowance, is before flipping it out you might want to cut off this excess fabric right there, just to make it easier. So now we're gonna tuck it in. We're going to pin it and make sure the loop looks like the other ones do at an angle. And we're gonna mark where I stopped. I'm gonna stop right there. Oh, I guess it would. Okay. So now that it's folded inside out, it looks very nice. We're going to, hang on, make sure this thread is out of the way first. And we're going to put our needle close to the edge, very close to the edge, but not too close, otherwise you could end up sewing off the fabric and that wouldn't be very good. Needle down, press your foot down, and we're gonna do 2 stitches forward, and then 1 stitch backwards, and then we're gonna continue sewing along the edge, and then until we get to about here, make sure to hold it down. And we're gonna stop there. 1 or 2 stitches backwards, 2 to 3 stitches forward. And then we lift up the needle if the needle's already up, if the needle's down, and lift it, press your foot up, cut the thread. And now we have a hammock. Okay. See? We're gonna cut off the excess thread right here. Carefully. See? And it looks really adorable. All right, now to do the top stitch, which is the stitch that goes right along the edge, and it just makes it look fancier, I guess one might say. It's this stitch along the edge. It makes it look more refined, and it makes it look more complete, like a finished product. And so for this, I would take a piece of tape, and because you don't want to, this part's going to be, you don't want to, you could do a seam allowance for this basically, just a line that you follow. And you're going to take some tape, which I find is easiest. You're going to put it on your machine, like right about, I put it here, like this, and make sure it's straight so that when you're sewing, the fabric is following this line the whole time to make sure your top stitch is straight and not wonky. And also, I'm using just a regular stitch for this one, but if you want to use a fancier stitch, like one of these, here's what it would look like. This is definitely a little bit harder and you're using up more thread. So if you're a beginner, I would definitely suggest just doing a regular stitch. Okay, so for this one, we don't really need to mark our start and stop position because we're just sewing, and if we overlap, it is totally okay. All right, so needle down first, press your foot down, and then we can start sewing. So 2 stitches forward always, and 1 or 2 stitches backwards, and then we're going to start going, and always make sure your fabric is following the line. Now when we get to a corner for this part, you know when to stop, when you knew when to stop because you had the seam allowance. This time we don't, so we want to kind of eyeball it to make sure it's kind of on the line, like it's about the same length. And always make sure you have your needle down when you are turning a corner, because otherwise it can look weird and you'll have a loose stitch right there. Now we're going to lift the presser foot up, and we're going to turn the fabric carefully, put the presser foot down, and continue sewing. And it's okay if the stitch is a little wonky, because I don't think I've seen a single hammock that was perfect. So we're just going to have this. And I've done a ton of these hammocks, and even some of mine are definitely wonky, and it's totally okay. But another thing, if you're doing one of the fancy stitches, like this, then your stitches will be more visibly wonky. So you want to be careful and very precise when doing that. So you might want to mark where you're sewing for that one. Now I'm getting to the end, turn the corner, needle down as always, press your foot down, and then we're going to continue sewing. And you want to make sure the stitches overlap a little bit. There we go. Let's stitch backwards, stitch forward, and then we're going to lift the presser foot up, lift the needle up, and there's your finished product. First, we're going to need to snip these little threads, and it looks so adorable
It's so cute. I'm so excited that a little hamster or a little guinea pig, maybe a baby mouse, gets to use this and snuggle it. And it is so cute. This is what our finished product looks like. The pattern is so cute. It's so nice. And to hang it up, all you need is probably some metal hooks. And you hook it to the cage, and it looks like this. And the little mouse or hamster or gerbil or guinea pig, whatever, can sit in there and have a little nap. And it is so cute. Thanks for watching. Bye.